Sincerity and self-awareness. Both things that are integral for the creation of many cartoons, and nowadays, that second part, self-awareness, goes too far. Rick and Morty's great, but tons of the jokes stem from said self-awareness, and at some point it becomes tiresome, while Hell of a Boss knows what it is and perfectly targets its hyper-specific teen audience, but it suffers from other issues. Both of these shows lack sincerity though, as Rick and Morty is extremely cynical to everything, and Hell of a never really goes all the way with anything serious, and in fact, undercuts a lot of serious moments with badly placed jokes. But Happy Tree Friends' Amnesia, on the other hand, is the opposite. It's incredibly genuine, but it lacks majorly in self-awareness. And while there's some charm with that, since works without irony nowadays are hard to find, there's something that has to be asked because of that. Does the sincerity make up for the lack of self-awareness? Overview. Amnesia was made by a Spanish animator named Sebastian Rodriguez. Before it, 11 years ago, they made AMVs like their radioactive one for Flippy that got very popular, before they eventually, 7 years ago, made the second episode of Amnesia before the first, named Warrior Inside, and the rest is history. Amnesia itself is an animated, infamous, hyper-popular serious fanfiction of Happy Tree Friends, where the characters and some OCs get infected by some kind of virus, which causes them to kill people who aren't infected. Because of the eyes, I'll just be calling this the Sonic.exe virus throughout the video. Anyway, what makes Amnesia so unique is the fact that it keeps the AMV element of Sebastian's previous videos, so every single one of them has basically Imagine Dragons level music or tough alt-rock. Basically imagine Falling in Reverse's The Drug in Me Is You and all the clips that you see me use in the video, and you'd understand what it feels like to watch this. This single factor is what will make Amnesia probably the most unique cartoon I'll ever review on the channel, and it's why I can't use any unmuted clips of the cartoon. Since this is a pseudo AMV series, practically everything is paced and timed to the music, which is good and bad, but before we get into the bad, I want to give credits to Sebastian for the good animation and interesting writing decisions. Sebastian does amazingly at copying HTF's art style, and the animation, as the episodes progress, just gets better and better. My only issue with it overall is the weird floatiness and slow motion feeling of everyone, making everything feel like it's underwater, though this affects some scenes more than others. Episode 6's fight between Flicky and Russell, when Flicky's running and jumping on Russell's octopus, feels as snappy and as high energy as a fight like this should, but in 5.5 when Crow Marmot slams these two random OCs together like he's Thrag from Invincible or something, the underwater feeling comes back. This is because the animator wanted to time certain things to the song's beat drops, so these moments felt more epic at the sacrifice of snappiness and fluidity. Either way, the animation is still great, and this floatiness isn't a big enough issue to undercut the show visually. I can name a lot of examples of great animation, but two of my favorites were in episode 5 and 6. Flicky being sent down to hell with the high quality airbrush lighting and the floaty animation actually looks amazing, which is a rare instance of the show's overly cinematic nature positively affecting it. And episode 5 is another instance of the cinematic nature coming through well, as a scene of Flippy allowing Flicky to take over since he can't handle the death of his girlfriend Flaky fit the lighting and the framing tonally. Sebastian is clearly an incredibly skilled animator, and honestly, the show writing wise is solid, even though Sebastian clearly made it up as he went. This is one of those rare instances where it doesn't backfire, and that's thanks to episodes that give extra context to what happened previously. Plus, there's no over explanations because since this is an AMV series, every episode is constrained to being however long the song that the creator chose is. And he never uses dialogue until episode 6.5. It clearly means that the author knew that since he made it up as he went, he'd have to explain previous things in the story so they don't feel like bizarre writing choices or later retcons. A good example of what would come across as an odd writing choice is when in episode 2, Flaky and Flippy fight off hordes of infected as infected themselves. Flippy for some reason has blue eyes unlike everyone else, and then Flaky snaps out of being infected, even though nobody else did this before or after. This doesn't feel like crap because in episode 5, we learn that Flaky was infected before and cured, so we can assume that it affects her differently. And we learn that Flippy only halfway got the Sonic.exe virus, and that his alter ego Flicky got part of it too since he was transforming during it. So it was really Flicky who got infected and not him, which is why his infection looks so different from everyone else's. Sure, it's not perfect since the infected pretty much never fight each other outside of like when Lumpy was half transforming, but to me it's a good enough backstory to be satisfying. Functionally, the story works like this with a lot of things, though due to the AMV nature of it, its fast pacing and its tendency to jump to different side stories and characters like the 0.5 episodes and main episodes, and the fact that there's no dialogue until 6.5, meaning that nothing's really explained, given how much the story tried to do, it all feels extremely convoluted and confusing. Amnesia wanted to do a lot with its story, but because of how short every episode is and its lack of dialogue, it has to cram in as much as possible while making it understandable without words. On a first watch, you just won't get a lot of things, and a perfect example of this is the flicky thing I talked about earlier. It took 3 to 4 rewatches, and a lot of thinking on specifically what that was in order to get it. For example, I didn't initially connect the gunshot he heard to that triggering him, and then I had to come to my own conclusion, meaning that I could actually be wrong about this. A lot of things are complex in this story like that, which comes off as more convoluted since it uses a blink and you miss it approach to lore, which is extremely bizarre for an AMV series like this. This show also feels like way more is happening than just the main story. The 0.5 chapters focus on other characters, like 1.5 focusing on Lumpy's backstory, or they expand on the world and give us cool fights, like 5.5 with Chrome Marmot vs. Mime, but none of them are majorly relevant to the story. It's just extra info, and the most useful one is probably Mole vs. Disco Bear in 4.5, since Disco Bear comes back in 6. But even then, you don't really need to see that previous fight to accept that Disco Bear basically has music powers. On top of this, the main episodes also have odd lore moments, like when Lammy's killed by Flaky in episode 3, and then Lammy's dad comes down from the afterlife to fight Flaky in spirit form, though this kind of thing never happens again. All of these things create a weird conflict of necessary and unnecessary information because it's all still the main series. In 5.5, when Chrome Marmot got infected and ran off after beating Mime, that's never mentioned again. But in 4, when Sniffles showcases the Kiba syringe to Flippy, which is a strange unexplained moment that only lasts for a few seconds and is immediately followed up by a fight, that ends up being important in episode 5, where Flippy stabs himself with that very syringe to become stronger. It's easy to not know what you have to remember in the show on a first watch, or even a second, because it's unclear and half of this series is really just filler episodes. You might think the pacing would be a problem that adds on to this, and while it's not bad, it's a bit too quick and certain things aren't lingered on for long enough. Again, what's up with the Sniffles Kiba syringe? Why does it give Flicky back the exact same infection he had in episode 2, even though episode 5 showed that that kind of infection was created through special circumstances? And what's up with the first infected who offers Flicky his heart and it summons the Grim Reaper? Of course there are other examples of this, but the biggest problems the show have to deal with childishness, absurdity, and inoffensiveness. Amnesia is one of the most childishly edgy shows I've ever seen, and while that's par for the course for such a hyper-cinematic, serious AMV show, that early 2010s edge is what makes it so hard to take seriously. And outside of the music, we can just look at how Flippy and Flaky's relationship is portrayed, and when Flippy holds her corpse in his arms and cried. It's far from being done poorly, as showing that Flaky and Flippy are in a relationship with a dreamlike flashback and then juxtaposing it to the presently dark moment in episode 4 is pretty good actually, since we immediately get the dynamic versus what's happening now. And Flippy holding Flaky in his arms is also functionally solid since we saw how close they were, and she sacrificed herself right in front of him to save his life. These are functionally good scenes, but the framing and the way things happen, like how we see Flippy and Flaky's relationship in the dreamlike flashback, or Flippy holding Flaky's corpse, all feel like something a kid would imagine as highly serious moments in a story after seeing his first PG-13 movie. In a vacuum, I think these scenes would work, but purely because of the music, shading, art style, and the fact that this is a HTF fanfiction, aka a show that was originally just a dumb, gory shock cartoon for adults, I can't take it seriously. And frankly, given these elements, the story takes itself way too seriously. So even if there's competent writing underneath, it took me about 4 or 5 rewatches before I stopped laughing. This mixed with the fact that the info that you get from the series is convoluted and already confusing meant that I had to watch the series multiple times so I wouldn't misremember anything. And that's really abnormal. I only watched Terrible Mouse twice to make that video. I only watched parts of Pretty Blood twice, and for Pork Chop and Flat Screen, which is 7.5 hours long, I only needed to watch it once to remember everything important and necessary. Amnesia is like 45 minutes total, and yet I had to watch it like 5 times. What it is isn't forgettable because it's so unique, but what happens in it is more forgettable than all those other things simply because it's accidentally funny and very convoluted. It doesn't help that even if you can easily take the series seriously, like maybe by watching it on mute or something, the story is both inoffensive, simple, and absurd. Things like Flicky being dragged down to hell and Flippy being brung to heaven, or the fight between Chrome Marmot and Mime, or Lemmy just having Spider-Man anti-venom powers are all cool, but these things, especially Flicky being dragged down to hell, boomerang back into being silly instead of dark and cool like what was intended. And outside of crazy absurd things like that happening, you've already seen a plot like this. 2 lovers fight together to survive an apocalypse. One sacrifices themselves for the other and the other goes crazy. It's okay, and like I said, functionally solid, but it's not groundbreaking or that interesting, and if you don't check the story out, then you're not missing much. The only really interesting aspect of the story is Slippy's PTSD, and I say that it's the best handled element of it. I really liked that every time he was triggered, it made complete sense, and I thought Flippy being unable to take in the grief and instead letting Flicky take over in episode 5 and 6 was a sick choice. Despite everything it has going for it, which is a lot, it has the exact same vibe as that one series Loud House drawing of one of the sisters throwing up in an alley. Yes, the art is good, and I'm sure that if it was part of a regular story, we'd feel for her, but since it's a Loud House, it automatically feels out of place and edgy instead of dark or sad or serious, and that's basically Amnesia in a nutshell. Why it's ultimately for kids. I can't see any adults enjoying this unless they watch it on mute due to these odd elements. I can only see a teen who's already a big Happy Tree Friends fan that watched the lore video in order to understand this show enjoying this. And I say that that's a niche audience, but it really isn't, because some of these videos have upwards of 40 million views, and even recent ones like episode 6.5, an episode that has nothing to do with the main plot, almost got 10 million views. To put that in perspective on how insane that is, Too Much Scream Time, which is the official Happy Tree Friends most recent episode, got 4 million views less than this extra Amnesia episode. Nonetheless, I think that it's mostly, if not all kids watching and enjoying this show, but as a person who's not really nostalgic for this style of video or era of the internet, I think the best way to enjoy this show is sadly, ironically, or some kind of cringy nostalgia if you're my age and grew up with AMVs. In the last video, I already explained why Happy Tree Friends is for kids, and it's because it shows them very clever and it's too repetitive. Watch that one if you haven't. I'm a total Sonic the Hedgehog fan, much like everyone else, and because of that, it reminds me a bit of the Shadow the Hedgehog game. It was cool to teens and kids that wanted to play something that felt dark, adult, and edgy, but really it was just an imitation of something dark, because given what Sonic is, it can't go too far in that direction. Amnesia is similar as it has violence, tragic moments, and death, but it's really just a cheesy and offensive story told through edgy rock songs, with an art style that runs completely counter to what it wants to do. Conclusion: Amnesia isn't bad. It has interesting writing decisions, good animation, and some solid storytelling if you can take it seriously. That if does a lot of heavy lifting though, because it's almost impossible to if you're not a very specific kind of person. I'd say that it's too sincere, and that sincerity doesn't save the show. The worst part about it is that it's inoffensive, and in it, there's nothing you haven't seen before. I made quite a few comparisons, but here's the last one. It's like that wolf painting where he has horns and he's sitting by a lake. It's a great painting, but it doesn't feel like anything special, and instead of feeling like this is deep and so me, I basically just get radiation poisoning from it in the form of teen angst. Either way, I think it's a bit overhated. Maybe you'll enjoy it if you check it out, and it's leagues better than all the other series cartoons I've reviewed previously. Become a member for $3 to see extra and early videos, like and subscribe, and I'll see you all again when my PCFS video comes out. Have a good one, and may God bless you.